Tillman, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing today, Skip?
So we had a listener with a question. What is your question?
You Bash Brothers, you're in the age when you can handle technology, but us older folks, the digital divide is huge. So now you're out using this amazing internet, you're going to talk to the whole world, and again, you think it's just commonplace. And then the younger generation below you Bash Brothers, they're born with this in their blood. I don't understand. Am I ever going to get across that digital divide? Because to me, I just get further away from it all the time.
I have an interesting take on this. I went to a seminar once that talked about generational differences with technology in the workplace. And contrary to popular belief, millennials are not the ones that typically understand how technology works, because for their entire lives, technology has just worked for them. So when they pick up their cell phone, they don't care how it works. It works. It's actually Generation X that's been the one who's learned how technology works for the most part, because they were there in its infancy when computers were coming along. I remember as a kid, Skip and Tillman, both of us would actually have to go to the computer store, order parts, install them ourselves, and actually know how that process looked. To millennials, they never had to do that. They just went to Dell and bought a brand new computer every time something went wrong.
Or they downloaded an app and they just know it works.
Right. Now, what's interesting is that maybe the newer generation is taking a little bit of a different take on it, because I see that there are younger kids who have gotten much more involved in the coding. So maybe it was the difference of we really understood the hardware. You think about somebody like a Steve Jobs, a Wozniak, right? They all learned the hardware, which was so important in the day. Now software is coming along, and to some extent, I'd say we're a little bit lost on that.
I would agree, because most millennials and the younger ones want to create their own app for 99 cents in the App Store, right? So they take a more active interest in understanding that.
This young generation, I think that they are born and then they entrain to technology. There are infants in the crib who have entrained to their iPads and to baby Einstein and baby Mozart, and they're so entrained to it that once I handed my 4-year-old a device that I couldn't get to work, and I had a degree in computer programming. I couldn't get it to work, handed it to this child who could barely speak, and he worked it instantaneously. I want to know, are they being entrained to some type of evil because they say that this technology is making them blind because they're using their phones at night with no lights on in the room, and there's a whole plethora of types of illnesses that are arising from this, the dopamines that come from this psyops control of Facebook and other social media. They are so addicted. Today at Thanksgiving, who's going to put their phone away before they go to that dinner?
Okay, you raise a lot of points. Let me answer a few of them. First of all, technology these days should have a Surgeon General's warning on it, okay? It literally is an addictive product. So
that is brilliant.
Yes, it should have a Surgeon General's warning on it. Now, second, your generation, you guys, when taking care of your kids, had to play with them, right?
Yeah.
What generation do we do now? We just give them a device. They're 3 years old and they have access to all these, YouTube channels with the cartoons and everything else. So your babysitter for that generation is the device itself.
Absolutely. My children read books, believe it or not. But you know what? They were already so addicted, I had to pay them to read the books. And you know what they did with the money? Bought more technological devices, toys, games.
Addictiveness is an interesting thing. A lot of these larger companies actually know that phones and such devices have an addictive nature to it, and they really study that to a large degree. They know that there's this reward system that's built in. Every time you pick up your phone and there's a message or a text message, or you go to a game and there's a prize or something like that, it's a positive reinforcement of the behavior. So you end up going in and doing that because you're excited to see, hey, what's new on my phone? That's why so many people like Facebook, is I want to go in there and see if somebody liked my video, if somebody liked my picture, if I got a comment, right?
So your original question is the generational divide in technology, right? Yeah. Your generation, our generation, the next generation down. At the end of the day, I think the larger question is what's going to happen in the generation 50 or 100 years from now? Because I personally think, and you see it already on the internet, You're going to have computer chips in your brain.
Absolutely. Transhumanism, and they all want an AI god. There's no artificial intelligence right now, except for one computer. But everybody wants an AI god. They started an AI church. Everybody wants AIs.
Well, it's already happening. You see in soldiers that come back that have, spinal issues, right? They actually have chips inside of them that can sometimes regulate. People with, I think it's Parkinson's, I may be wrong, that have those things. It sends neurotransmitters. They have little chips in there. So we're already seeing that integration of technology and human. And you have to ask yourself, are we losing our humanity?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think you're going to get down to the ethics of it, and there's a side to be argued for both. On the one hand, you're helping somebody who had no other option, right? So somebody who's paralyzed and has a chip in their brain that, suddenly sends the signal to some sort of, stimulation device to contract muscles. Well, now you've given the person to use the ability to use their hands again. That is a great, profound thing. However, to your point, where does that line get drawn, right? What point do we lose our humanity and we become so much integrated in technology? It's almost like plastic surgery in a sense, right? Right now, we're focused on people who need this service, right? That need this adaptation in order to function. But eventually, it will become something where, wow, wouldn't it be great to have this extra strength or, extra, endurance of some sort to be able to have this technology integrated into my system? Well, that's where the ethics, I think, get a little bit blurry, because now you're no longer doing it out of necessity, you're doing it out of choice.
You nailed it, Tillman. It's the ethics. Should we continue to create the Atlas robot, which started at Apple and then went to Motorola, and now they have an Atlas Warrior robot that can, with his fist, knock down a brick wall and can pick up a human and carry them out of a war zone, can drive a car, can act independently. It looks like it's a complete AI. They already have these, folks. I watched it yesterday. It can jump into the air and do a backflip. And
I saw the same thing.
We all saw it on Truth News headlines.
That's crazy.
You can read.
I think the answer is a simple yes. The problem isn't the technology. The problem are the humans and the way that they utilize technology. The ethics question isn't necessarily whether this technology is good or bad, but it's the ethics of the individuals who choose how to use it.
It's about morality.
And I would go so far as to say, aren't you losing a lot of yourself the more you utilize and rely on technology? Look at the stock market, right? We now have artificial intelligence buying and selling stocks for large broker houses, right? Because of the speed of it. But you fast forward, again, what's our society going to look like 100 years from now? We're already integrated in technology. We're reliant on it, right?
Are these scientists so stupid they never watched a sci-fi movie that shows what happens with the robots? That's the robot wars. What happens with cyborgs? Oh yeah, that's the cyborg wars. What happens with the cloned humans? Oh, that's the clone wars. I mean, does this have to be spelled out to them? Who stops scientific innovation that is amoral? That is my question.
But I think the larger point you raise is there's nobody to do that. Because by the time it becomes a problem, who's going to stop it? We're already well beyond it. You don't know what you don't know. And at the end of the day, technology just is exponential.
I think that scientists often ask these ethical questions, but I think at the end of the day, they usually err on the side of invention and creation.
Or they exist in silos in their thinking and even in their professions. They don't necessarily look outside that silo. And one of those areas would be in the ethics and morality of what it is they're creating.
Well, exactly, and it's unintended consequences. They have a specific vision of how their technology would be used. And sometimes it's hard to see how somebody who doesn't have the same ethics as you or the same morals as you is going to utilize that technology.
But remember, scientists have all the best intentions. But then what ends up happening? We end up using it for other purposes. And you see the darker side of things.
Sean Parker, the head of Facebook, said just a few days ago that when they created social networking, they knew that it was a drug that caused dopamine releases in the brain. They knew how to solicit those, and they knew that it was a psyops. He literally used that word, that it was a psyops project, that they were in fact intending to take away every moment of your waking life, suck it into their program, and then control you, and then see what the metadata produces. He admitted that in public on the air.
I have a distinction, maybe without a difference, to what you're saying. I think that it's truly motivated, and this is such a blessing but a curse at the same time, by capitalism, right? We look at why companies are interested in having that dopamine released, and it's simple. It all comes down to being more profitable, right? We see this very large trend towards microtransactions, right? And the reason is, and we look at it with gift boxes and games and other things, is that there's that inherent gambling. Casinos for the longest time have benefited from this, right? There's that gambling sense. I'm going to give it a shot, and when I win,
Yay,
boom!
Bitcoin!
Bitcoin is a good example, right? There's this release of dopamine that you do not get when it's an expected result. And companies do that for one reason alone, in my opinion: profitability. And it's the blessing and curse of capitalism.
And remember, you talked about microtransactions. It's not like you're having to go out there and spend $100,000 to get that sort of dopamine reward. You're spending 99 cents, or you're spending $10, right? It's micro. It's very small, but it happens so often and so regular. You wonder why our generations can't save for anything, is because they're spending all their money on these microtransactions and these dopamine releases.
Exactly. I mean, it's just one step removed from truly a casino. Casinos give you chips because there's a disassociation between an actual money and this play item that I'm using on the table, right?
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
it's kind of the same thing. If I take such small quantities, you don't realize that over time this adds up to a lot of money.
And I'll bet you anybody who has spent money on technology, gaming specifically, and things of that nature, if they truly sat down and added up, looked at their, iTunes transactions on their credit cards and everything else, I think you'd be amazed. I'll bet you some people could probably buy a new car with that.
Funny you say that. This might be a good question for our listeners to comment on. What was the dollar amount of your last iTunes invoice?
Skip, Tillman, you guys nailed it. Because really what is going on is this is game theory applied to gambling, applied to the internet. What was the number one use of the internet at first? Well, it was built as a weapon, and it went to all the colleges where they were doing military research for the government. The number one thing after that was pornography, and then came gambling. And then we started putting all of our business on it, and now we're all addicted, and all of commerce, worldwide globalism in terms of commerce is on the internet. So my question to you two, I know you were both addicted. You were both addicted to playing these games because of your age. I know that. I know that we weren't, and I know that I leave my phone far away from me most of the time. I ignore technology. I am in the digital divide. I don't know if I will ever cross over the chasm, but that's because I'm terrified of what it is that we have just framed now. So you guys have nailed the problem. My question is, what's the solution? How did you get out of your addiction? What can you tell listeners is the path? Because you're not addicted to being sucked into all that, because just as you described, it was a form of gaming that had a gambling kind of surge and rush of a thrill, and I don't see y'all involved in that anymore.
I think that there's a very understandable reason why. We grew up in a generation where we got to see what it was like not to have that technology. So when we were younger, we were in that generation that you went outside and played, and you didn't come home until mom rang the dinner bell. But we were also in the generation when computers were just coming, into everybody's homes. And so there is an easier way for us to disconnect, to say to ourselves, there's a different way. And we've seen that. We've lived that. But for people that are younger than us, they don't have that easy divide. They've always had technology in their life.
And I think to address how to avoid that, first, like any other addiction that you may have, is first accepting that you have a problem. Second is an awareness, right? Just being aware that these microtransactions, as Tillman pointed out, are occurring on a regular basis. At the end of the day, being aware, accepting the fact that, maybe it's not a good idea for me to be sinking all of my, quote, play money, real money, into these things, that I might actually make better life choices. And at the end of the day, that's how, at least I got out of it, was being aware.
Well, I think that's a good place to go ahead and stop this. So this is Skip and Tillman signing off, and we'd like to thank Thomas and Betsy for joining us today. We really appreciate that.
It was our honor, gentlemen.